Australia is an amazing country. The climate's often extremely hot with limited rainfall, which causes serious water shortages across large parts of the country, yet they grow cotton there. Meanwhile, cotton is one of the most water-dependent crops. It takes about 2,600 gallons of water on average to grow just 2 pounds. To put it in clothing terms, making a single pair of jeans uses roughly 713 gallons of water. But on the other hand, these jeans can be sold for cash, something Australia is actively doing. However, you know what else makes the country so surprising? Lately, after wasting tons of water on cotton, Australians have started just dumping it into the dry soil. Why? That's exactly what we'll figure out today. When people talk about Australia's wealth, they usually think of iron or coal. But cotton seems to stay in the shadows, and that's a real shame. There are 1,408,000 acres in the country used for growing cotton. If you could put all those fields together, you'd get something the size of Brunei. But since they're spread out, the cotton ends up in New South Wales and Queensland, the key states where about 1,500 farms grow this crop. What about the climate? The very one that makes growing water-loving cotton seem like a questionable idea? Australians have adapted so well to their conditions that neither high temperatures nor low rainfall are a problem for cotton farming. We'd even say intensive cotton farming. Look, there's Uzbekistan, one of the world's biggest cotton producers. Their yield hits around 1,600 pounds per 2.5 acres. Then there's the U.S., which has more land suitable for cotton farming. There, the yield reaches about 1,740 pounds per 2.5 acres. China, though, is taking yields to the next level. They hit up to 2,960 pounds per 2.5 acres. But in Australia, the yield is out of this world, a whopping 3,600 pounds from 2.5 acres. What's their secret? First and foremost, this became possible thanks to drip irrigation and other methods. Over the past 20 years, the Australian cotton industry has managed to cut water use per bale of cotton by a whopping 50%. Besides, growing cotton in Australia, as unusual as it may sound, is a high-tech business. Farmers aren't just landowners anymore, they're drone operators, data analysts, cartographers, and scientists. They actively use automated systems, satellite imagery, and AI-driven irrigation for maximum efficiency. In the end, even in Australia's tough farming areas, the country still manages to produce around 1 million tons of raw cotton fiber per year. Yeah, it's not a world-beating number compared to other countries, but given the climate, it's an impressive achievement. Still, cotton comes with its own issues. On average, an Aussie bought 59 pounds of new clothes a year, and only Americans bought more. But according to research by the Australia Institute, out of those 59 pounds, a whopping 51 pounds went straight to landfills. To put that into perspective, data shows that every 10 minutes, 16 tons of textiles are dumped in Aussie landfills. Over a single day, more than 2,300 tons of waste end up in dumps. The amount of trash is just insane. Every year, Australian landfills take in hundreds of thousands of tons of textile waste. According to the Australia Institute, around 860,000 tons of waste are generated in total, with about 300,000 tons coming from cotton products, from worn-out jeans to crumpled t-shirts. Cotton itself is a natural biodegradable material, but in landfills, the situation is far from perfect. In tightly packed layers of trash, the fibers don't get air and light. Instead of decomposing in a few months, they sit in landfills for years, losing nutrients and failing to restore the soil. Besides, when textiles break down without oxygen, they produce methane, one of the most potent greenhouse gases. And the dyes and synthetic additives in blended fabrics leach out of the fibers, threatening to contaminate groundwater. In the end, that supposedly eco-friendly cotton item turns into a silent time bomb. With so many technologies used for growing cotton, it's only logical that Australia must have some ways to recycle the waste, right? Well, yeah, but only 7% gets recycled. The rest just sits in landfills. Where else would it be? All right, actually, Australia has another way of dealing with waste, and it's pretty wild. So every year, the country ships over 100,000 tons of trash to Southeast Asia, and there it all just ends up in piles, scattered all over the place. So the question, what to do with all this, is really pressing. Obviously, recycling plants and similar facilities are the main solution the country's pushing for. However, not too long ago, the Gundi Windy Circular Cotton Initiative came along. It showed that cotton waste can just be buried. And no, not just to hide out of sight, but to actually make Australian soil more fertile. The project is backed by a strong consortium: the Queensland Government, Goondiwindi Cotton, Sheridan, Cotton Australia, the startup Warnup, and CRDC, with technical support from renowned soil scientist Oliver Knox from the University of New England and experts from Corio. All in all, there are a lot of players involved, which matches the scale of the whole idea, recycling massive piles of cotton waste. All these organizations started dumping cotton waste into Australian soil. Of course, the project was carefully planned, so they didn't just bury trash, they ran tests first. It might sound like boring lab work, but this was where they discovered that cotton waste doesn't just have to go to factories or other countries. So phase 1. Researchers took samples of cotton fabric from clothes that usually end up in landfills, then placed them in not-so-great Australian soil for growing crops, and left them there for 24 weeks at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. First off, it turned out that cotton acted like a stimulant for bacterial and fungal growth in all samples except one. The reason here is that cotton's about 94% cellulose, which is a rich source of organic carbon and contains elements like hydrogen, oxygen, and some trace minerals. All of this is essential for the growth and reproduction of soil microorganisms, bacteria, and fungi, which in turn play a key role in boosting soil fertility. Do we even need to say that this effect will play a huge role in boosting the fertility of Australia's dying lands? No doubt about it. It was really important to find out what would happen to this cotton material in the soil over 24 weeks, because if there's any residue left and it's causing harm, the project's scrapped. Cellulose is biodegradable, meaning all the bacteria and other soil inhabitants have no trouble breaking it down. As a result, almost everything added to the soil disappeared within 24 weeks. That's a success, with one big caveat: the tightest weave of cotton fabric wasn't added to the soil. Still, the researchers offered some reassurance. It's still cellulose, so the underground critters just need more time to fully break it down. Finally, the researchers tested what would happen if they added cotton seeds to this soil. The most important thing they managed to prove was that cotton material didn't negatively affect the germination of the cotton. At the same time, as we've already mentioned, since cellulose is a good diet for underground microorganisms, the cotton seeds actually did better with this kind of trashy fertilizer than without it. Long story short, the first phase proved that cotton cultivation can be upgraded with the very same cotton that's already been processed. Sounds perfect. But the studies didn't end there. Phase number 2 began. In 2021, researchers shredded about 2 tons of cotton fabrics, clothes, and used-up coveralls at Warnup's facility in Sydney, then brought them to a farm and spread them over a cotton field. The prep work for planting the next crop went smoothly. Remember how cotton material is great food for bacteria and fungi? Well, it turned out that the soil quality on the test plot improved, leading researchers to conclude the trend for crop growth is looking good. Besides, the lab results were confirmed. Recycled cotton clothing isn't harmful to plant growth. No negative effects were observed, and nothing like that was found even at high application rates, like 50 tons per 2.5 acres. Later in 2022-2023, Phase 3 trials took place, and the results finally showed that the soil starts to bloom when recycled cotton is added. In Goondiwindi, New South Wales, they've already added 10 tons of recycled cotton to the soil, and as a result, the organic carbon content in the top 4 inches of soil increased from 0.77% to 1.08%. Doesn't sound like much? Scientists disagree. Organic carbon content is an indicator of soil health, and even this small boost is a big leap, showing that even Australia's parched land is becoming way more fertile thanks to cotton. Plus, it was found that the sulfur content in the soil increased from 0.0001 ounces per 2 pounds to 0.0002 ounces per 2 pounds. This, by the way, is another sign that the cotton is actually doing its job. The Goondiwindi Circular Cotton Project can already be called a success. All the main assumptions have been proven. However, if a more tangible measure of success is needed, the Cotton Research and Development Corporation, or CRDC, has allocated $300 over 3 years for all research related to composting cotton textiles. One of the research projects, for example, is looking into granulating cotton fabric so it can be spread over fields using existing farm machinery. This will make distributing cotton pellets across large areas more efficient. You could say it's groundwork for supplying cotton fertilizer to vast Australian territories. During cotton harvesting, just like with wheat and other crops, there's another type of waste left behind, the stalks. That is the stuff that's no longer needed and is dried up. And this is also a problem because this kind of waste rots if you don't do anything to process it. Why not just dump this waste into the ground too? That's exactly what they did in another study, and it lasted a whole 12 years. During that time, they discovered a whole lot of interesting stuff. The project tested 4 different fertilization methods, from simple mineral supplements to a mix of straw and organic matter. The goal was to figure out if they could bring exhausted soil back to life and at the same time stabilize cotton yields. The researchers didn't just make a slight improvement, they achieved a stable and significant result. The option, with both cotton straw and organic manure applied together, turned out to be the best in every way. The cotton yield on these plots was 32% higher than in the control group, where only standard fertilizers were used. But it's not just about the harvest size. Where straw and manure were added to the soil, it started to feel different. It became looser, less dense, and small particles clumped together into larger chunks. This matters because large clumps are a sign of healthy structure. They hold water and air better, and plant roots find it easier to grow. The most noticeable changes happened in the upper 4 inches of soil. The soil's chemical composition has also improved significantly. There was noticeably more nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in these areas, especially where manure was applied. For example, available nitrogen doubled and organic matter increased by almost half. Interestingly, even the soil acidity dropped a bit, which also helped. But the best part is that no zones with oversaturation or degradation were found. Now let's talk a bit about organic carbon. It's the very element that makes soil alive and fertile. When straw and manure were added, its content increased in all layers. And this wasn't just any carbon, it was the kind that actively takes part in nutrient cycles. Dissolved organic carbon, or DOC, and microbial biomass carbon, or MBC, their levels grew by 1.5 to 2.5 times, meaning the microorganisms in the soil came to life and started processing waste faster and more efficiently. But the most interesting part is the connections. The more organic carbon there was, the more stable the yield. The lower the soil density and the higher the microorganism content, the better the results. The study clearly showed cotton straw and manure work like long-term investments in soil health, and they work best together. Separately, they're still useful, but together they create a synergy effect. In the end, over 12 years, the land changed. It became loose, alive, richer in nutrients, and more resilient to external fluctuations. The harvest grew more stable, and the system itself became less dependent on chemical fertilizers. If the soil had a voice, it would probably say, "Thank you," and then ask for more. So straw and t-shirts are great for fertilizing Australian land, no doubt. But picture this. Your old cotton t-shirt could transform not into compost, but sugar. Yep, you heard that right. Researchers at Lund University in Sweden discovered a chemical method to break cotton down into glucose, which can then become the base material for spandex, nylon, or even fuel. Seems wild, but hey, that's chemistry for you. What did the researchers do? They took mattress fabric, towels, and old jeans, then soaked them in sulfuric acid at a carefully controlled temperature and concentration. The result was a dark amber liquid where the cellulose broke down into glucose. No bacteria or enzymes needed. From one cotton sheet, you can get about 1.3 gallons of sugar solution, and every 0.3 gallons is roughly 33 sugar cubes. Of course, nobody's planning to drink this. The acid's still in there, so you need to neutralize it first. What makes this method even more interesting is that it barely depends on the quality of the fabric. Torn, faded, even heavily worn fibers. Everything can be used. The only condition is that it must be cotton. Blends with synthetic materials aren't recyclable yet, but scientists are already working on it. Right now, the lab isn't just looking for the perfect chemical reaction, but also a way to scale up the process. The goal is to turn an old t-shirt into raw material for new industrial cycles, from textiles to packaging and biofuels. If it works out, it could completely revolutionize how we handle clothing. The most important part is that this approach isn't just theoretical, it's already working in test tubes, and it's getting closer to industrial-scale production. So how about this situation? There's a spill, say of diesel fuel. It's flooded the whole area, which is going to cause some serious environmental issues. What does cotton have to do with it? Well, scientists brought piles of cotton-based materials to the spill and started spreading them all over the diesel puddles. Thanks to a special manufacturing process, this material doesn't really look like cotton anymore. It's hydrophobic, meaning it repels water instead of absorbing it, and it's extremely oleophilic, so it soaks up oil like a sponge. And this is just the perfect scenario. You put the material on water, it's not absorbed, but then in just a short time, it soaks up diesel or some other petroleum product. Meanwhile, just 2 pounds of this stuff soaks up around 1.7 gallons of oil, and you can simply squeeze it out and start gathering more over and over. No extra steps needed. What if we take a huge amount of this material and cover a large area? That's also possible because, for example, in Nigeria, they've developed special presses that can squeeze out up to 79 gallons of oil from a unique oil spill collection solution. You know what all this means? It means this option is perfect, especially compared to other ways of cleaning up such spills. And yeah, Australia isn't exactly a place where nothing harmful ever gets spilled. In fact, stuff like this happens quite a lot there since the country extracts tons of materials that can produce this kind of waste. Australia's got plenty of choices for dumping waste or surplus, cotton-related or otherwise. But whether this gets put into practice outside labs and testing grounds, that's something only time will tell.